Tonight is the continuation of a storytelling that we began last week. There's a book in the Bible named Ruth, and it's only 4 chapters long. It's about 3 people, and their stories are interwoven with each other. The main thing is that they love one another, and they express that love in many, many ways. So I want to review, because I know there are many new people here tonight who may not be familiar with the story of Ruth. So I want to give you an understanding of what's happening in the story. And then David and Barbara are going to read chapter by chapter, the last 2 chapters. And so you'll be able to hear the rest of the story. So today, as we all know, we celebrate the birth of Jesus, who was born in Bethlehem. And we remember he was born in very humble and difficult circumstances. But he's not the first person who was born in Bethlehem under humble and difficult circumstances. In his family, going back 1,200 years before, his family was having difficulties in the city of Bethlehem. We remember how a family of 4, a mother, father, and 2 sons, went away from Bethlehem to another country because of famine. While they were in that other country, the father died. Then the sons took 2 wives, each had their own wife, to clarify. And after 10 years of marriage, both of those husbands died. So the mother lost her husband and her 2 sons in a foreign land. So she makes a decision to return to Bethlehem, and the whole first chapter is about returning. So we remember now that only one of the 2 daughters-in-law returns with Naomi. Naomi is the mother, and Ruth is her daughter-in-law. They're 2 widows who make their way back from Moab to Bethlehem. And the story is told at the beginning through the eyes of Naomi, the mother-in-law. She suffered the loss of her husband and 2 sons, and she was embittered in her spirit, especially because she felt that it was allowed by God for this to happen to her. And she is a lot like another Old Testament person named Job, who also declared his pain and anguish as he lost everything. And so Naomi and Job are similar. Listen to the words that she declares. She says, "I went out full from Israel, but the Lord has brought me back empty. The Lord has witnessed against me. The Almighty has afflicted me." Now, Ruth, she's a Moabite woman. She's not an Israelite. She's a foreigner. She also returns with Naomi to Bethlehem. She also suffered the loss of her husband. But like Abraham of the Old Testament, she leaves behind her family, her gods, her nation, her identity, and she pledges allegiance to the God of Israel and to Naomi. Your God will become my God. When she did that, when Abraham was asked to leave and come to the promised land, he had promises specifically given to him by God. But Ruth had no promises. She was doing it out of a deep sense of loyalty and love for her mother-in-law, and also her deep faith that was growing in Israel's God. After they returned to Bethlehem, Ruth the daughter-in-law, began to work very hard to gather food for them because they were in poverty. They were very poor as two widowed women. And so she wasted no time to fulfill her moral obligation to provide both for her and for her mother-in-law. She always, from the beginning until the end of the story, Ruth puts her mother, Naomi, ahead of herself every time. Then, when she's working hard in the field, she just so happens to meet a man named Boaz. And Boaz is this wealthy, respected citizen of Bethlehem who owns much property. And he takes an interest in and wants to know, who is this widow in my field? And when he discovers who she is, he provides care and concern and food for her and for her mother. He demonstrates something that we see in this. We have a slide. Do you see this? It says hesed. It's a Hebrew word, but it's the word that permeates this whole letter. And it means for people who have a loving commitment based on a covenant relationship with other people. They are moved by compassion for the helpless, and it's manifested in extraordinary acts of mercy and generosity. All of that in the English is what's required to capture the meaning of this one Hebrew word. It's an amazing word in that language. Okay, so with that in mind, so now we are Naomi at home, waiting for Ruth to do her work, come back from the fields. And we're going to pick up the story in chapter 3. So we want you just to listen to David and Barbara as they share the story.
Say something? Yes. All right, so I just do want to encourage you. Put your phones down and just listen to the words. It's like story time, but this is a story that's part of who we are in Jesus. At that time, Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you, so you will be secure." Now Boaz, with whose female servant she worked, is her close relative. Look, tonight he is winnowing barley at the threshing floor. So bathe yourself, rub on some perfumed oil, and get dressed up. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let the man know you're there till he finishes his meal. When he gets ready to go to sleep, take careful notice of the place where he lies down. Then go, uncover his legs, and lie down beside him. He will tell you what you should do. Ruth replied to Naomi, "I will do everything you have told me to do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law had instructed her to do. When Boaz had finished his meal and was feeling satisfied, he lay down to sleep at the far end of the grain heap. Then Ruth crept up quietly, uncovered his legs, and lay down beside him.
In the middle of the night, Boaz was startled and turned over. Now he saw a woman lying beside him, and he said, "Who are you?"
She replied, "I am Ruth, your servant. Marry your servant, for you are a guardian of the family interests."
He said, "May you be rewarded by the Lord, my dear. This act of devotion is greater than what you did before. For you have not sought to marry me, one of the young men, whether rich or poor. Now, my dear, don't worry. I intend to do for you everything you propose, for everyone in the village knows that you are a worthy woman. Now, yes, it is true that I'm a guardian, and there is another guardian who is closer than I. Remain here tonight. Then in the morning, if he agrees to marry you, fine, let him do it. But if he does not want to do so, I promise, as surely as the Lord lives, to marry you. Sleep here until morning.
So she slept beside him until morning. She woke up while it was still dark.
Boaz thought, no one must know that a woman visited the threshing floor. Then he said, hold out the shawl you are wearing and grip it tightly. And she held it out and gripped it tightly, and he measured out about 60 pounds of barley into the shawl and put it on her shoulders. Then he went into town, and she returned to her mother-in-law.
When Ruth returned to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, how did things turn out for you, my daughter? Ruth told her about all the man had done for her. She said, he gave me these 60 pounds of barley, for he said to me, do not go to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Then Naomi said, stay put, my daughter, until you know how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest until he has taken care of the matter today.
So, remember in chapter 2, when they came back to Bethlehem, it was Ruth who took the initiative. She took the initiative almost every time to that point to go out and find work. But in chapter 3, we see now Naomi is taking the initiative. She steps up. She sees now, okay, it looks like we're going to have enough food, but that's only a short-term solution. What's going to happen to us in the long term? Because we are still in poverty. And so she turns to, Naomi says to Ruth in chapter 3, verse 1, my daughter, shall I not seek security or rest for you, that it may be well for you? Now, what does she mean by that? Well, that word rest is used in one other place in this book, and it's in chapter 1. It was when Naomi had prayed a prayer of blessing over her 2 daughters-in-law, thinking they would both go back to Moab. I bless you that you find rest, and that you would find that in the home of a husband. So she connected the rest with finding a husband, because in the ancient Near East, for a woman to be secure was to be in relationship and be in a marriage in that culture. And so she then, in chapter 3, she says, okay, now I'm going to get involved in answering my own prayer request for you. Have you ever done that? Have you ever prayed for someone only to discover that God is looking right back at you and saying, yeah, that's a good prayer request. And what are you going to do about it? That He wants us to get actively involved in answering that prayer. Now, of course, we know that even with Naomi's strategy and planning, it's still going to involve a number of other people before her prayer can be answered. And that's not in her control. That's in God's control. Because Ruth has to be willing to follow along, and Boaz has to be willing to follow along. And there's also going to be another person in the story that doesn't want to follow along. He said, no, I don't want to do that. And so there's still much to be determined in this story. So what is Naomi's plan? Well, she wants to get Ruth in front of Boaz. That's helpful if you want 2 people to get married. It's good to get them face-to-face time. So that's her first plan. She knows that Naomi is going to be on the threshing floor. They've gathered all of the barley. Now they have to beat it, throw it up in the air, and get the grain out. And they do that on a threshing floor, a big area. He's going to be doing that this particular evening. So she wants Ruth to go down. I want you to wash yourself. I want you to anoint yourself. I want you to put on your best clothes. Now, behind this is something significant, and that is, up to this point, it's understood that Ruth is wearing the clothing of a widow. She has been mourning the loss of her husband. By changing her clothes and washing and putting on perfume and putting on some nice new clothes, she's making a statement in that alone, saying, I'm no longer mourning my husband, I am now available to be married. So this is a signal. So she is to go down to the threshing floor. This is, and wait for him to finish eating and drinking, then watch where he goes to sleep, and then come secretly lie down at his feet. And then she's supposed to just wait there, and he will tell her what to do. Well, Ruth says, okay, what you say I will do. Now, we need to feel the tension here, what's in this story, because this plan is full of risks. Sending a young woman to the threshing floor at night, not a good idea. Fathers, this is not where you send your daughters. Why? Because the threshing floor is all men. They're doing that work. So the men are gathered together. This is sort of a half work, half celebration time. So they're drinking, partying, having a good time. A whole bunch of guys. So you send this young woman, to sneak up to the corner of this to watch it. That's a risk. Then, and Boaz, he's merry with drink. How will he act in the cover of darkness when Ruth lays at his feet? This is an interesting question. The first time that Boaz meets Ruth, it's in public. It's out in the field. It's, there's lots of people around. So he treats her with respect, kindness, everybody can see. But now it's going to be in private, in the cover of dark. How's he going to treat her then? Which raises an interesting question for us to examine ourselves. How are we, when we're in the public place and we're with people and we're out in the open and broad daylight, do we act one way? But then how are we acting in private when there's no one watching and it's in the cover of darkness? Are we the same person in both those places? Are we just that wonderful person outside and we turn into something else and we come home to the family, something like this? So it's going to be interesting to see just how does Boaz react to Ruth under the cover of darkness when nobody will know what happened there. Now, Naomi knows the risks of this whole operation, but she also understands there's an incredible reward if it works, namely that Ruth will have a husband, and that's the whole idea. So, and here's an interesting little take on this. Because it's happening in the middle of the night, it's really only between two people, Boaz and Ruth. If it fails, nobody gets damaged beyond those two people. Nobody else knows about it, so their reputations are not going to be damaged by this experience. So, anyway, Naomi said, okay, I'm going now, and off she goes down to the threshing floor. So you can just imagine, it's getting darker and darker. She's watching all these men having a nice time, and they're drinking, and thinking, okay, and she's keeping an eye on Boaz and watching exactly where he lies down. Remember, it's pitch dark. She has to remember where he is so she can make her way there and then lie down at his feet without waking him up. She does that. And sometime in the night, Boaz, in the Hebrew in here, it's very strong, it's a very strong reaction. One pastor said he went from a nightmare to a dream when he laid eyes on this Ruth. I like that. Boaz suddenly trembles. Verse 8, it happened in the middle of the night that the man was startled and twisted himself forward, and behold, a woman was lying at his feet. "Who are you?" "I am Ruth, your maid." Now, what's interesting here is it's great to compare the two times that they meet. Chapter 2 is the first time, chapter 3 is the second time. Chapter 2, when Boaz wants to know who she is, she gives a word that means I'm a low level slave. I'm not really anything at all. But here in chapter 3, she uses a different term to describe herself. I am a maid, a marriageable maid, as a matter of fact. There's a couple of other examples of, for example, Bathsheba, when she came to King David and said, I'm your maid, and I do believe you said that my Solomon is supposed to be king. She describes herself in the same word as a maid. That's how she describes herself to Boaz. And then she takes the initiative. Be clear here, she is taking the initiative. She is proposing marriage to Boaz. So spread your covering over your maid, for you are a redeemer. Now, this is not just a happenstance meeting. This is a serious piece of business that she's asking for. Number one, she wants, I want you to marry me, and then that firstborn child who is going to restore and continue the name of my deceased family. And when you buy the land from Naomi, it keeps that land in that family's name. That's what I want you to do. Boaz, her request is extraordinary and very costly for him. And yet he's not defensive. He's not dismissive. He could have just, said, go home. What are you doing here? But he praises her. He praises Ruth for this request of marriage. He says, first of all, you could have gone and got any young man in this town, which means to say, I'm an older guy, maybe not your first choice. He also understands by doing it this way, seeking marriage with him, she's actually looking out for Naomi more than she's looking out for herself. So Boaz understands the risk that Ruth is taking. So he comforts her. Don't be afraid. Here's a man who is accustomed to telling other people what to do. But here he says, I will do whatever you ask. That's his response. Now, why would he do that? This is that in love. People mostly paint this as a love story, but it's not really about that. He says the reason why. Because all my people in this city know you are a woman of valor, a woman of excellence. It's your reputation. It's who you are that makes me say yes to what you're requesting of me. And he elevates her from maid to a woman of valor, equal to him in status in that society. The word Boaz uses to describe Ruth is the same one that is used to describe the woman of excellence in Proverbs 31. And if you know that proverb at all, just a few verses here just to give us a taste. This is describing this woman. She looks well to the way of her household, does not eat the bread of idleness. Many daughters have done nobly, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful, and beauty is vain. But a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. How did she win this praise? In the ancient Near East, the woman would receive this praise. She's married and raising children. What is the condition of Ruth at this moment? She's a widow. She's a single woman. She's not married with children. She's a widow. She's a single woman. That's significant. That is enormously significant in the ancient Near East for someone to be raised to that status as a single person. That should give, I believe, a great hope, because it's about our character. It's about who we are. That's what counts. That's where we get our identity and our value. And as women, I'm not one, but as a woman, that is where you get your significance and your value. It's in relationship with God. And having the character of God demonstrated in and through you. And the greatest gift that Boaz gives to Ruth, and the greatest gift we can give to one another, is recognition for your value and for your worth. Just to speak that to one another. And we see that throughout this whole letter. People just blessing, praising, giving value and worth to one another in the name of the Lord, over and over again. So this is wonderful stuff. I love this. And then something happens. Boaz says, oh, by the way, I'm the wrong guy. Oops. I'm not the one that you're supposed to be sharing this with. Because there's actually someone else who's closer to you than me. He's going to be the one that we need to determine whether you are redeemed and married, not me. It's not my decision. So you can imagine Ruth. Really? Wow. That's awkward, right? But here's the thing that's interesting about Boaz. Boaz knows the law. He also knows the spirit of the law, what is intended to be fulfilled in it. And Boaz remains faithful to God and faithful to his understanding of the word. He's willing to pass on being the Redeemer for the sake of being right before God and his word. Trusting in God that God has what's best for her. He's not the determiner of that. It's God and his word is the determinant for what is best for each one of us. And so he says, here's the thing. I'm not the guy, but I will find him, and I will settle this for you. And if he will not redeem you, I pledge to you right now, I will. So in either case, you do not need to worry. You are redeemed. And then he says, I don't want you going home in the middle of the night. Stay here till morning, because I want you to be able to return safely to Naomi. And I don't want you going empty-handed, which is significant. Remember what Naomi said. I went out full, I came back empty. I don't want you going to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Gives her, how much was it? 60 pounds, 30 kilos of grain. Take this as just let you know that I am a man of my word, and let your mother-in-law be secure with the food, and we'll take care of this, and I'll settle this tomorrow. How does it get settled?
Now, Boaz went up to the village gate and sat there. Then along came the guardian whom Boaz had mentioned to Ruth, and Boaz said, come here and sit down. So we came and sat down. Boaz then chose 10 of the village leaders and said, sit down here. So they came and sat down. Then Boaz said to the guardian, Naomi, who has returned from the region of Moab, is selling a portion of the land that belongs to our relative Elimelech. So I am legally informing you. Acquire it before those sitting here and before the leaders of my people. If you want to exercise your right to redeem it, then do so. But if not, then tell me so I will know. For you possess the first option to redeem it. I am next in line after you. And he replied, I will redeem it. Then Boaz said, when you acquire the field from Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the wife of our deceased relative. in order to preserve the family name, his family name, by raising up a descendant who will inherit his property. The guardian said, then I am unable to redeem him, for I would ruin my own inheritance in that case. You may exercise my redemption option, for I am unable to redeem it. Now, this used to be the customary way to finalize a transaction involving redemption in Israel. A man would remove his sandal and give it to the other party. This was a legally binding act in Israel. So the guardian said to Boaz, you may acquire it, and he removed his sandal. Then Boaz said to the leaders of all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have acquired from Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Mahlon, as my wife, to raise up a descendant who will inherit his property, so the name of the deceased might not disappear from among the relatives and from this village. You are witnesses today. All the people who were there at the gate and the elders replied, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is entering your home like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built up the house of Israel. May you prosper in Ephrathah and become famous in Bethlehem. May your family become like the family of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through the descendants the Lord gives you by this young woman.
So Boaz married Ruth and slept with her. The Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The village women said to Naomi, may the Lord be praised because he has not left you without a guardian today. May he become famous in Israel. He will encourage you and provide for you when you are old, for your daughter-in-law who loves you has given him birth. He is better to you than 7 sons. Naomi took the child and placed him on her lap. She became his caregiver. The neighbor women gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. They named him Obed. Now he became the father of Jesse, David's father.
These are the descendants of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab was the father of Nashon. Nashon was the father of Salma. Salma was the father of Boaz. Boaz was the father of Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse. And Jesse was the father of David.
Boaz does not waste any time. As soon as the sun rose, he went to the gates of the city. Gates of the city is a place where legal transactions took place, where the elders of the city would make decisions. So that's where he went. And just then, it just so happens that that other family member who was closer to Boaz than he walked by. So he says, come here. And he takes 10 men as elders, and he says, I want you all to sit down. And I'm going to argue a case before you. So they all sat down, and he began to go to work. Now, it's interesting because the author never names this other relative. Why is that? Well, because he knows he's not going to do what the law requires of him, or at least he decides it's better for him not to do what the law requires. And so, because he is not willing to do the right thing, to remember the family name of Elimelech and Naomi, the author will not remember his name. So he gives him a little title. It's in the Hebrew, it would be our equivalent of, what's his name? Or what's his name? Do you remember the guy? What's his name? Or Mr. So-and-so? It's like, I don't remember, and it doesn't really matter. And that's the name he gives him throughout the rest of this chapter, Mr. So-and-so. So, Boaz calls him and 10 elders. They take a seat. And so he explains the situation. The widow of the land owned by Elimelech cannot sustain it. It's overgrown, it's not being used, and so she needs to sell it. And you're the nearest relative in line to buy it. We want to keep that property in the family. And so, will you buy it? And the guy goes, well, sure. I mean, that's an easy one. I enlarge my personal estate. He just needs to buy it. Then he can start to produce more property. Boaz says, great. Congratulations. But by the way, there's one more thing I need to tell you when you buy this land. And that is that you also will have the responsibility to raise up seed or descendants for the deceived family. So on the day you buy the land, you also acquire Ruth the Moabitess. Must marry her. Well, when he hears that piece of news, that he could buy the land and yet it would never come into his name, but it would restore the name of Elimelech and not his own, he backs out. He's willing to buy the land if it increases his own fortune, but he's not willing to sacrifice himself financially to save somebody else. So he's willing to participate in the covenant community so long as it does not involve any risks or no personal sacrifices. Needless to say, this is not the way of the kingdom. This is not hesed, this sacrificial, costly love for the sake of another. And this man, this nameless Mr. So-and-so, serves as a sharp contrast to his relative Boaz, who is willing to make great personal and financial sacrifice in order to fulfill the law of the kingdom. This is what does it mean to love loyally and sacrificially. So Boaz then steps in and does what Mr. So-and-so is not willing to do. So Mr. So-and-so keeps his inheritance, but loses his name. And Boaz acquires the land and marries Ruth. In 4:11 and 12, the leaders of the city, where they just watched and witnessed what they just saw, that was an amazing moment for them. And they heap blessing and praises on Boaz. All the people who were in the court and all the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman, Ruth, who is coming into your home, like Rachel and Leah, and both who built the house of Israel. Who were the mothers of the 12 tribes of Israel? Rachel and Leah. She's putting Ruth, they were blessing her to be on the same order and the same level as these two women. Furthermore, he says, and may you achieve wealth in Ephrathah and become famous in Bethlehem. Moreover, may your house be like the house of Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah, through the offspring which the Lord will give you by this young woman. Who's Tamar and Judah? They're the main couple of the tribe of Judah. Judah and Israel. And he puts this, they bless Ruth to say she's on the same level as all of these people in the story. So interesting to me that man held on to his inheritance and lost his name. Boaz took great risk and financial hit for this, but we're still talking about this guy. 3,200 years later. 1,200 years before Jesus, and Jesus was 2,000 years ago. I did the math. 3,200 years, we're still talking about Boaz and Ruth and Naomi. That's amazing. Boaz immediately marries Ruth. This guy is on the move. Doesn't waste any time. And Ruth, in time, gets pregnant, and she gives birth to a baby boy. And listen to the praises of the women of that city. Verses 14 and 15, the women said to Naomi, "Blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer today. And may his name, the one who's born, become famous in Israel. May he also be to you one who restores life and sustains your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons has given birth to him." Naomi then takes this Ruth's precious gift and lays him in her own lap, symbolizing that she is now the legal mother of this child. And Naomi completes, going from emptiness to fullness. She is fully restored. And then finally, the author adds a genealogy at the end. Did this child become famous? Oh yeah. We're still talking about him and his line because it leads us to David. He is the ideal king of Israel, but we also know he's the forefather of the Lion of Judah, and his name is Jesus. It's so interesting because Ruth is part of the genealogy of Jesus, along with 4 other women. They are Tamar, who was a Canaanite. Rahab also was a Canaanite. Ruth, a Moabite, and Bathsheba was married to a Hittite. None of these women are Israelites at the beginning of their story, but God grafts them into the story because of their faith and faithfulness to him and to his people. So I want to finish by asking a question. Where do we see ourselves in this story? Well, first of all, I want to pick up on that thought I made earlier, and that is to examine ourselves. And like Boaz, are we the same person in the public sphere as we are in the private spheres of our life? Can I peek in, or not me, but God, peek in on any point in your life and find the same person? Or are we changing personalities when we're in public versus when we're at home with our families or roommates or whatever? Or just even by ourselves in the night with the computer on. What's going on there? It is the same thing that we would see in any other point of our lives. I think that's a question that's worth asking. But coming back to this question, where are we in the story? There's these 3 people. Well, there's actually 4. Number 1, Naomi. Are we like Naomi, where our life circumstances have brought us to a point of bitterness against God? And the feeling that his hesed, his loyal love, has run out and is no longer available for us. You have been in a season of famine, of emptiness, and there's just no connection that you feel from God. What Naomi did was, in spite of all of that, she poured out her heart to God. And she returned to the place where she knew that she would meet with him. And step by step, God took her from that empty place and brought her back into fullness. Are you like Ruth, where you have seen and heard about the God of Israel and that you are ready to leave behind your family, your gods, your people, your national identity in order to take the enormous risk and pledge your life to the God of Israel and to his people? Are you like Boaz, where you have been faithfully serving God, and yet now, through circumstances, he's asking you to sacrifice it all for the sake of going to the next level with him, new heights, greater risk, having a deeper willingness to express God's love at great personal costs? Because that's what he did. He didn't have to move off of where he was, but he took risks together with Ruth, and together they were grafted into God's salvation story. I think it's important for us to see how all these people work together. It wasn't just one person here, one person there. These people were dependent on each other and expressing costly love and commitment and sacrifices for the sake of others. And it was by them all doing this, one to another, that they were able to move God's salvation story forward in a way they could not have ever imagined for themselves. And it shows that we can be partners with one another in God's kingdom, and we can do more things together than we can do by ourselves. Or there's that fourth person who does not want to take the risks, does not want to make any personal sacrifices. I think I'll just disappear from the story. I don't want to get involved in that story. It's too costly. That's an option. You can take that option. We pray that you don't. And can we trust God that by doing what these three people did, that God will be there for us and take us from that empty place we may be and bring us to a place of fullness as we are faithful to him and to his word? I think of the words of David. We'll close with this in Psalm 23. I tend to focus on other verses in that psalm, but this one hit me because it has the word hesed, that loyal love, in it. If we choose to follow God, and David chose to follow hard after God, he was able to say, surely goodness and loving kindness, hesed, will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Thus endeth the book of Ruth. I do want to invite you into that book to keep reading it. There's many, many more layers to this book than we were able to cover in these 2 weeks. It's deep water there, but it's beautiful. I want to encourage you to do that. And I'd just like to, in benediction and in closing, I want to turn to Isaiah chapter 6. Verse 8. Will you stand together with me and we'll close?